Guys, I'm in the Fairmont Hotel, and in this video I'm going to use their business area to just tell you guys what I think about the upcoming election. So there's probably a lot of people out there thinking, why is this foreigner not from here telling us what he thinks about our elections? I'm not going to choose or tell you who I think should win. I don't really have an opinion. It's for the people of Kenya to decide who should be the president of Kenya. But I've been doing a bit of research on the election. I just figured, seeing as I'm here making videos, I know there's an election happening on the 9th of August. So yeah, it would be strange for me not to talk about the election if I'm spending a lot of time in the country. People have been asking me whether I follow Kenyan politics, and I felt bad that I didn't actually follow any of it or know really who the main players were or what was going on, what the policies were, what the big issues are for the country. So I spent the last couple of days doing some research to figure out or to learn about some of the history of Kenyan politics, and also to learn about some of the current candidates, some of the themes that run through each of the elections. So first off, Kenya got their independence from the British colonial rule in 1963, and their first president was elected Uhuru Kenyatta, and he stayed in power until 1978. Following that, there was a leader called Arap Moi. So he stayed in power for around 35 years, from 1978 all the way up into around 2002. In 2002, Mwai Kibaki took power and stayed in power for 10 years, 2 terms, up until the end of 2012. Now, there was an election in 2007 that was very violent, and over 1,000 people died during that election. There was around 650,000 people that were displaced. A lot of the divisions were between Kibaki and one of the current presidential candidates, Odinga. And they were generally arguing on tribal grounds during that election in 2007, which resulted in a lot of conflict between the tribes within Kenya. There was then a power sharing agreement put in place. I think the UN Secretary General at the time, Kofi Annan, was a kind of power broker between the parties, and there was a power sharing agreement made where these two big factions came together to share power and run the government. Having dealt with a lot of the factional politics and the arguments during that period of time, a constitution was agreed in 2010, which put in place a lot of safeguards around the constitution, the rule of law, trying to make sure that things were codified in a way that couldn't be changed by the incumbent of the position of president. For example, it was agreed in the 2010 constitution that a president would only be allowed to have 2 terms, each 5 years, totaling a 10-year presidency. Now, that would have prevented someone like Moi staying in power for 35 years previously, but then obviously that codified constitution wasn't in place at that point in time, so he was able to stay in power. Many countries in this region don't have a codified constitution which require a president to stand down after 2 terms. That constitution was agreed in 2010, and then there was a subsequent election in 2012. That was between Kenyatta and Odinga, and the reason that it wasn't against Kibaki is because he reached the end of his 2-term limit in 2012, having come to power in 2002. So then when Kenyatta and Odinga competed against each other in the 2012 election, there was a lot of tribal rivalry. In this election in 2012, both of the opponents in that election came from 2 of the largest tribes in Kenya. Uhuru Kenyatta, the son of the original Kenyatta that was president in 1964 and was presiding over the independence of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta was from the Kikuyu tribe, whereas his opponent, Odinga, has come from the Luo tribe. This caused a lot of rivalry between these two tribal groups and a lot of conflicts as a result. That contest was very highly charged. In the end, the decision made during the election was contested in the courts, and the courts upheld the original result that Kenyatta had won that election. So the Uhuru Kenyatta, the junior Kenyatta, came to power in 2012. There was another second election that happened in 2017. Again, that was between Odinga and Kenyatta, and the two had a bitterly fought election during 2017. Again, less violence in 2012 than there had been in 2007, and in 2017 there was not as much violence, but still the tribalism and the arguments between the opposing factions, which resulted in a contested election. In fact, during that election, the Supreme Court ruled that in fact the election was not valid, and they had to rerun the election. So for an outside observer like myself and many others, that would suggest that the judiciary is strong and independent. Given that Uhuru Kenyatta came to power in 2012, he would have been in government during 2017. So the fact that he won the original election, but the judiciary were willing to say that the election needed to be rerun because there were irregularities in the voting and perhaps corruption, and it might not have been a free and fair election. The fact that they were willing to stand up to the executive branch within Kenya suggests that they are strongly independent, which is a positive thing, because you want your constitution to be upheld and for independence between these different branches of government, to make sure that they're holding the executive branch to account, which it seems in this case that they were willing to do. Bringing us from 2017 up to the present day, 2022, we have the end of Uhuru Kenyatta's presidency. He's reached the end of his two-term limit, as documented in the 2010 constitution. Now we have two different candidates. On one hand, we have the deputy president, who is Ruto, and he was the deputy president to Uhuru Kenyatta. Many people presumed that Kenyatta would support Ruto in his quest for the presidency after his two-term limit ended. However, there has been some form of rift between these two people. There's not full clarity from what I can tell as to what has driven the rift between these two parties. But many people have, but it's been clear that Uhuru Kenyatta, he's instead switched allegiances to his former rival Odinga, who he'd fought against in the 2012 election and in the 2017 election. He's now supporting him to be a candidate for the presidency. So all of this is a big change in the way that people had expected things to go because of this rift between these two parties, or these two men, Kenyatta on one side and his current deputy Ruto on the other side. Odinga is a 77-year-old man. He's run for the presidency 5 times. Then you have someone like Ruto. He's around in his 50s, and he's been deputy president for 2 terms, so for 10 years. And there's a contrast between the two in terms of what they're arguing for. A lot of people say that Kenyan politics is tribal, and to a large extent it may be. But in this election, Ruto seems to be trying to recast the divisions within politics as not tribal, but actually class-based. And he's put forward a policy for bottom-up economic growth, in contrast to a trickle-down model which he says has been in place for too long. and he's fighting against these what he terms as elite or establishment people who, and he's casting himself as a man of the people and as somebody who will look out for the boda boda driver or the person selling stuff on the street, people that aren't in the formal economy. And there's a lot of inequalities between classes within Kenya that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 restrictions. Now there's been an increase in the cost of living exacerbated by the Ukraine-Russia crisis, which is preventing grains from getting to Kenya and driving up the cost of fertilizers and other things. Food production is becoming a major issue. People are dealing with a drought that's become one of the worst in the last 20 years. So there's a lot of problems in northeastern Kenya that people are struggling with. So this casting of class rather than tribe has touched a nerve with the people that Ruto is trying to woo to vote for him. Now, Ruto isn't actually from the Kikuyu tribe or the Luo tribe. He's actually from the Kalenjin tribe, which is the third largest tribe in Kenya. There's 47 tribes in total, but Luo, Kikuyu, and Kalenjin are the three biggest. Now, there was some question as to whether he would continue to get the support of the people from the people from Mount Kenya, because generally they're from the Kikuyu tribe, and he's not from that tribe. However, a lot of people from that area have been supporting him up until this point. They think that he has supported President Uhuru Kenyatta for the last 10 years, and they feel a lot of allegiance to him for that. But the fact that the two major candidates for presidency, neither of them are from the Kikuyu tribe, that a lot of people suggest that that is reducing the amount of tribalism in this election. Despite the fact that Ruto is getting some support from that Mount Kenya area, Odinga in recent weeks has seen an increase in his popularity in the polls. And one of the main drivers of that was his appointment of a lady called Martha to be his running mate as deputy president. And she has a lot of support in that area. She's a Kikuyu, and tribal politics have kind of swayed a lot of people towards them and towards Odinga as a result of her appointment. Also, there's a large swathe of people that want to see a female closer to the presidency, and it might be an astute approach from her to have been on the ticket to run alongside Odinga. From my understanding, they've had a period over the last 30 years where at some point they've been enemies and other times they've been close friends, but they've come back together to run together to run the presidency. But you know, it might be an astute move from her, because if you're a deputy president, then it might put you in a position at a later stage to potentially run for the presidency. And Odinga is 77 years old, so he may not run for a second term, you never know, and so she might be well positioned to be the continuation candidate in the circumstances that he decides not to rerun. And then you might be in a position where you have a female candidate for the presidency. Having the backing of Kenyatta is also a positive thing from Odinga's perspective, although it casts him in the light as the elite or continuation. And Ruto is really saying that he is fighting for the man or lady at the bottom of the economic hierarchy, and that he's trying to do this bottom-up model that I suggested. Given the fact that Martha is now running alongside Odinga, it's meant that Ruto has put in place some quite ambitious constitutional changes that he wants to put in place to show that he has a female agenda. He wants to push forward some changes to the constitution that would increase the rights of females and their representation over and above what they already have in the existing constitution, where there's kind of safeguards in place for women to be fully represented. So yeah, what do I think? Well, I wouldn't like to choose between either of these candidates. It's not, like I said at the beginning, it's not for me to do so. But there are some general points that I could make about this, which is that it seems to me that even the fact that I'm making this video and feel comfortable doing so, given the fact that I'm in Nairobi, I feel comfortable making a video talking about politics, and I don't feel like I'm putting myself at risk. Now, one of the key things that you need in a vibrant democracy, which Kenya puts itself forward as in the global community that we live in, is that you need freedom of the press, and people need to feel like they can criticise candidates for what they say and what they think and what they believe and their background. We've just seen in the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been criticised relentlessly over some missteps that he's made over the last couple of years since he's been Prime Minister, and as a result he's lost the confidence of the parliamentary party, which means that he needed to step down. And it wouldn't have been possible for that to be the case if we didn't have a free press in the UK. So that's something that is very important for a well-functioning democracy, and it seems to be, from my perspective, that people have the freedom in Kenya to criticise or to say what they think or feel. They might have repercussions, and there is always that underlying threat of violence that has been there since 2007, for example, when 1,000 people have been killed. And I know that people are sensitive to political matters in this country, as in all countries, but there is less government interference in the freedom for people to criticise the government, from my perspective. But please feel free to correct me if this is wrong, and whether there's more interference from the executive branch than I had than I think. But I generally feel that it's safer to make a video like this in Kenya. The second point that I'd make, so we've got freedom of expression and affiliation. I believe in that. It's important for a well-functioning democracy that people have the right and the opportunity to vote. Now, the Electoral Commission in Kenya has been, from the reports that I've seen, the work that's being done by the Electoral Commission has been criticised quite a lot within the press about their readiness for this election. There were a number of issues identified by audit firm KPMG about the list of people who are eligible to vote. There were some dead people on the list, there were some people who were duplicates, there were a few things that were an issue. It took the Electoral Commission in Kenya a while to resolve some of those issues, and they've also been criticised because they haven't been able to increase the number of young voters that are on the electoral register to the level which they had anticipated. I think the numbers are around 21 million people are now on the register. They've probably cleaned up some of the things that KPMG found, from what I can tell. But there's a population of around 50 million, and many people haven't been put on the register or haven't had the opportunity to register, or the drive wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be. So in that sense, it doesn't seem to me like the population has fully grasped their franchise. That might be down to the Electoral Commission to some degree, but it would also be down to disenchantment from the people that could sign up to vote, that they believe that there is corruption, that the election won't be fair, that they just feel like there's no point in voting. And there's a lot of work to be done by politicians in this country to try to convince the Kenyan people, and the Kenyan youths in particular, that while it's not everything is perfect, and you can't necessarily change everything overnight, the most important thing is that one person has one vote, one man, one woman can go out and express themselves at the ballot box to change the direction of the country, if they so wish. And the first step in doing that is to register to vote. So I think there's some work to be done to increase representation, increase the franchise of people that are voting in Kenya, and it seems to me like there's some criticism being directed at the Electoral Commission in Kenya for their preparedness. That might have also been driven by the fact that they've not been well funded by this current executive government. Apparently they didn't have a chief executive in place until March this year. So there's some perhaps criticism to be levelled at the Commission, perhaps at the current executive branch for not fully funding them. But at the end of the day, there is an election going to take place in August, and they'll need to get prepared as much as they possibly can to make sure that people have the opportunity to go out and express their franchise and vote for the candidate that they want to win. Now, it's important to note that it's not just the presidents that are being voted for in that election. There's also many other seats in Parliament that will be voted for, and people have the right to express themselves across all of those different positions in government. We've talked about freedom, we've talked about democracy and the franchise and people having the ability to vote, freedom of expression for people to make videos like this or criticise candidates and that type of thing. The other most important thing is the rule of law. What we have seen is that Kenyatta is standing down because of a constitution that states that he can only have 2 terms. So it seems to me that the rule of law is well functioning in the sense that he isn't clinging on to power like you get in some other countries around the region. We can also see that the judiciary, like I mentioned earlier, is establishing itself as a force for preventing the executive from controlling the narrative. They were willing to do 2 things. I mentioned already, they were in 2017, they've made a judgment that the election needed to be rerun, even despite the arguments made by Uhuru Kenyatta and the executive branch. That election was rerun, and indeed Uhuru Kenyatta won and he had a 2nd term. The other thing that they have been willing to do is to prevent or to deem certain constitutional changes that were being brought forward by Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta over the last few years, the Building Bridges initiative. They were proposing some constitutional changes as a result of them coming together to be strong parties together, to shake hands famously, and they've proposed these changes. These were strongly criticised and argued against by Ruto, who is the deputy president and current candidate for president, and fighting against Odinga and ostensibly Uhuru Kenyatta. He was saying that these things were actually meant, these constitutional changes were perhaps trying to shore up control in the elites and the establishment, and this all feeds into the class warfare narrative that's being pushed. And so the judiciary in that circumstance were willing to strike down the changes that were being made to the constitution and say that they were unlawful. And this can give Kenyans going to the polls confidence that if there is a challenge made by the loser of the election in August, that the judiciary will look at it independently and be willing to come to an independent decision as to whether the election should be upheld or whether it should be rerun or not, because they were willing to do so in 2017, and they're not. Doesn't seem to be that they're kowtowing to the executive branch, whoever that may be, and you would want that to continue whichever party wins this election. Coming to some of the policies that are being put forward by the 2 parties, I've mentioned Ruto's, which are more about bottom-up economics. He's also offering or suggesting that loans can be provided to people at the bottom to try to offer credit to more people. But then on the other hand, you've got Odinga that's proposing something similar, but he's calling it a stipend, and it would be, rather than a loan, something that would be given a 6,000 shilling stipend given to the lowest in society, people living in official poverty. But he hasn't fully defined the perimeter around which he would determine who gets that 6,000 shillings or not, from what I've seen so far. So there's many questions. Both of them are talking about similar topics. They're talking about education, they're talking about healthcare, they're talking about transport, they're talking about how to deal with the cost of living crisis, how they would change the economy to try to make it work for people at the bottom. And Odinga has also mentioned trying to fight against corruption, and has made that a big centerpiece, that if you reduce the amount of corruption in the Kenyan economy, then you could use that saved money to pay for some of these things like a stipend. And there's questions from some people around whether that's realistic or not, given past experiences. My only observation or suggestion to the parties and to the people of Kenya would be that people should take heart from the fact that the judiciary seems willing to challenge the executive branch, so that if in the circumstance that Odinga wins this election, for example, and Ruto challenges it in the court, the general public can take heart from the fact that the Supreme Court will fully investigate the matter and come to an independent decision, regardless of whether Uhuru Kenyatta, in support of Odinga, wants the result to be upheld. And likewise the vice versa. If Ruto was to win, there wouldn't be a rerun automatically just because the executive branch wants that to be done. So with that said, it would be important for the people of Kenya to not take to the streets, to not reignite the violence which was seen in 2007, and to stay calm and accept the result of the free and fair election with an independent judiciary. Seems to me there is a lot of debate going on Twitter, on various social media channels, so people are being able to challenge these candidates and ask them questions and find out what they truly are proposing for people. So the information's out there. There's never been more information because of the internet. People can get access to it. There's a lot of internet access penetration in Kenya, which is great, because people can find out the information that they need to make an informed decision without bias, or ideally without bias. I'm trying to give you an impartial view from somebody that's a foreigner, and so they can get access to that information. People should be able to go and vote. Anyone that's not registered to vote should make sure that they do that for the next election. People who have registered to vote should turn up on the day and vote and have faith that the results will reflect what the populace has voted on, because of the judiciary being able to uphold the rule of law. And ultimately there's a constitution in place that has safeguards that there may be impeachment if either of the candidates doesn't uphold their responsibilities in line with the constitution. And there's also a 2-term limit, so whoever is voted in today, there's an opportunity in 5 years to vote them out, and in 10 years time another president will be in place, and we'll be able to rechart a course and direction for the country if people aren't satisfied with that. So this is what I believe as a foreigner watching the Kenyan election. You've got to believe in the system of governance rather than the individual candidates who might have big personalities. But like in my own country, Boris Johnson telling jokes, being a character and a big personality, and also driving through some big changes, but at the same time was undermined by his own missteps and mistruths. And our system of government allowed the party to get rid of him and show that they didn't have confidence in him as a leader. And there are systems and checks in place in Kenya as well, which allow Kenyans to have confidence that their country will continue to improve, and the system of governance will stand the test of time. So that's all I had to say today. I'm happy you guys have watched this. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to a foreigner's perspective on the Kenyan elections 2022. If anyone has any comments or thoughts on the things that I've said in this video, or if I've misstated anything or I've got anything wrong, I've only done a few days research to figure out what some of the themes might be behind the election. So I'd love to hear from you guys, but I just wanted to explore this. I've been doing some research over the last couple of days, so I wanted to have the opportunity to say what I've found out, and then find out from you guys whether what I've said is accurate and whether there's anything I'm missing. And with that, I'll say hit subscribe to my channel. I won't be doing all politics videos like this. Some of the videos are me just going around showing you different stuff, talking about self-development topics as well, and just anything I'm generally interested in. So if you liked this video, then tap the like button, subscribe to my channel, share it with a friend who might need a little bit of information about the election. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.